Hi everyone, we're going to be blazing through some slides here. Hopefully, just because I want you to be exposed to a lot of these ideas when it comes to human factors, but I also know that this is not a psychology course, and B, I can be a bit long-winded about a lot of these things. So we're going to look at perception first, then we're going to look at color perception in particular, and then we're going to look at cognition. Just enough to get us through initially what we're looking at from a human factor standpoint, and then we'll apply that to how we make visualizations. And so it's going to directly relate to other stuff. It also should relate to what we've done previously. And so we've already talked about some of these human factors when it comes to how we do particular search tasks. We also looked at different kinds of task analysis, and all those are based off of these same sort of principles. So if there's a principle that you don't quite understand where it comes from or why it exists or why you should believe it, I'm more than happy to explain it. Okay, so we're going to quickly look at life factors. I think we have another set of slides with life factors afterwards. Then we're going to look at perception, because life factors are a part of what we're looking at when it comes to perception. Then we're looking at color and cognition. And I love the fact that I can finally spell color with a U. I've been in the U.S. for so long, and I can't say Z either, and they keep on looking at me weird. So we used to do a study for my biz classes involving life factors. So here is what a life factor is. The idea is when you have some kind of graphic, some kind of visualization of data, a life factor is what the data is trying to say, or what you're expecting the data to say. The data in this case is, let's say, the difference between this and this, 1978 to 1985, is 53%. That's how much of a difference. That's the delta in the data between 1978 and 1985. The difference is a 53% increase. The image itself, if you're measuring the image itself and what it's trying to convey based on the length of that line here, it's actually 783% difference. Now you're probably thinking, but David, of course it's going to be like that. Look, there's this perspective. It's trailing off into the distance, so of course you would have that. But do your eyes see that? Does the lower part, do the basic visual processing systems of your brain actually see that perspective? Or is this a higher level thing that you're adding on top of it to be able to realize that it's a perspective, and therefore it's just screwing up the data? And that's what a life factor is, where you're presenting things in the wrong way so that your gut reaction or your ability to immediately read a visualization, ability to immediately read data changes because you're relying on this, having to override what your visual processing system is for you to realize it's a perspective here in this case and deduce what to do. Similarly here, right? I have two cones, or a cylinder, sorry, not a cone. Two cylinders. You could say it's 2 times the amount of volume, but it's not really. Now, the height is twice as high, but the amount of volume it's implying is different. And on top of that, even if you said the amount of visual, the amount of image in your visual field, what you're looking at, the size of that image, it's going to be different because of this 3D perspective. It's going to screw stuff up. Should I go from 1 to 2? Well, the distance here is twice as much, but the amount of area I have it's a square, right? It's 300 times. It's the difference between the 1 and the 2 is 300% increase in the size versus just twice the size, right? So as a result, our life factor ends up being a life factor of 3. If we have a perfect thing, the amount of distance or the amount that being represented by the data, the image shows a 100% increase, and the actual data is a 100% increase. There is no life factor. A life factor of 1 means it's accurately representing the number. But if it's off from that, you're going to read it wrong. Here's another. This is actually one of their assignments, right? This is why you don't do perspective. Look at that. This cylinder in the back here, where half of it's being cut off, so you may not even see half of it. There's occlusion caused by the cylinders in front of it. Where does the bottom of this cylinder go? You theoretically could go down here, but you don't know that. It could stop here for all you know. So you have occlusion, and on top of that, it's a forced perspective, which is very, very subtle. So if you're measuring these two things, how do you know how accurate it is? This cylinder takes up a lot more visual field than this cylinder, despite the fact that this should actually be a higher number, yet it looks smaller because this is in front. And this is where lie factors come in. We cannot just assume that we see the world as it is. So, we want to learn a basic anatomy of the visual system, and we're learning about how perception works for the human visual system in particular, and how low-level processes relate to visualization design. We're looking at pop-out effects as well. So, here's your eye, right? It is, for all intents and purposes, a giant lens, or there is actually a lens in there, right here, which takes light coming in, focuses it, and then plops it and projects it back onto the back of the eyeball. Much like a telescope, like a magnifying glass, whatever you want to do, what to think about. This chamber right here actually is just fluid, and therefore it's able to transmit, the light's able to go through, be focused by the iris expands and contracts, letting more and less light in. The light gets focused through the lens and gets projected on here. And then you have neurons at the end. But the fovea, we're going to look at the fovea in a second. We're going to look at the optic nerve in a second. But essentially, it's a big lens, and it's a projection plane on the back. I like pointing this out, though. So I like my stock photo things. I mean, they're tacky as hell, but I still like talking about them. So reality is merely an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. I like the fact that what you should be paying attention to when we're doing this is that what you perceive as reality, what you're going to keep seeing again and again, what you perceive as objective reality is in fact not true. It is all very individual. It's individual perspective, which makes it very, very difficult to say that this is right or wrong. There's also something that you cannot assume that the way you look at a visualization is the same anyone else looks at it, or how you look, just examine your data in general is how other people look at it. For the more depressing version of the reality is an illusion, if life is an illusion, it's a pretty painful one. Life and reality might be illusion. The idea of a color, for example, does not actually exist. It is how you're perceiving light, different bandwidths of light going into your eye, and what neurons are being activated. Now, we're assuming that other people see the world the same way, but that's not actually necessarily true, which leads to weird stuff. But we'll look at even further, because my personal favorite part of this whole thing is not only that everybody's perspective is going to be different, but you are composing and generating your world after the fact. Your eyes do not see the world as like little cameras. You do a slew of visual processing after the fact. You get bare minimum little bits of information, and then it goes to the back of the brain, and then you do this crazy amount of parallel processing of your data, of that image data, to get patterns. When the original digital camera came out, supposedly in the 1960s, this is a story from a friend, so take it with a grain of salt. When the original grad student, and working at Google now, so he's not dumb, but when the original digital camera came out in the 1960s, it was given to a grad student, and they said, figure out vision. There's your summer project, essentially. It may have been a dissertation, but either way, we're still trying to figure it out. We still do not have it up to human level sense. We're getting close. But, I mean, that's the 1960s to today. That is this huge span of time when we just say, oh yeah, vision, it's easy. No, just getting the pixels, just getting, sensing the light is a small, it's a minuscule amount of that journey. What ends up happening is you get light hitting your retina, you get an action potential on your neuron, so your neuron fires, the electrical potential goes cascading down, passes from neuron to neuron. These are actually particularly long neurons, if you didn't know. It'll go all the way across. It'll actually, half of it will traverse this optic chiasma. But you cross, half of the neurons are going to cross over, the other half of the neurons are going to keep on going. It will go all the way to the back of your head, the big bumpy thing in the back of your head, which a bit unintuitive for a lot of people. You're seeing from the back of your head, not from your eyeballs. That's actually where all the processing happens. Then you'll start looking at very basic shapes, or very, very basic, light patterns, and then you'll build more complicated structures based on those light patterns versus more complicated and more complicated until you see what you're going to see, and then your object recognition systems and your motor cortex and a bunch of other systems get involved after the fact. But there's a whole lot of levels of processing, very much like a packet going on over TCP/IP, right? If you're sending a packet over the internet, the basic part of the packet before you put the other layers on top of it is not enough for to really send information across the internet. So you add a layer and you add a layer. It's a layered approach for how we process visual information. The light itself goes to the back, and we have what's called rods. We have what are called cones. Our cones are this thing here. They are allowing us to see color. Humans have a ridiculously large number of cones compared to a lot of other species. We're very, very, very good at seeing color compared to a dog. Versus your rods are predominantly good at seeing black and white. Color differences in illumination, differences of light and dark. The outside, not in your fovea, so anything along the outside of your eye, around here, but not right here, all those areas are predominantly rods. You're very, very good at seeing just general shapes out there. But around where the fovea is, you have this really high packed, really dense number of cones to see color. And that's something very special about humans. So we'll look at that in a second. But here's the idea. The light goes in, it goes through this membrane, it goes through this mesh of neurons, which I find fascinating. It hits epithelial cells on the back here. That's with the projection plane. The light hits this, and if a photon hits this area, it may or may not, depending on how much light, excite one of these neurons. So the light hits there, and the neuron that's touching that area might get excited and fire. They're very tightly packed, so the light hits there and it fires. If it's a red light hits there, it fires. If it's a green light, it hits there, it fires. A red light hits there, the green cone doesn't fire. If there's no light that hits there, the rod doesn't fire. What you have is a bunch of connections. All these rods and cones are connected to one another, and so you get this little bit of initial processing of your information, and we'll look at that. Then all those neurological signals go onto your optic nerve, this big cable of neurons that are going out the back of your eyeball, and they fire through into the back of your brain. So here are your cones, here are your rods. This is actually approximately what your fovea might look like. This patchwork here. Every single one of these green dots would be a green rod. Every one of these red dots would be a red rod, ability to see red light. And you probably can't even see it in this thing, but there's little blue dots in there as well. Those see blue. They're ridiculously small compared to the reds and the greens. We'll see why in a second. But it allows you to check or see 3 different colors, 3 different levels of light levels. And that gives you everything you need to know about hue, I guess. Your rods, however, are seeing something very, very different. But here are your 3 cones. This is the bandwidth that a blue cone fires off at, 420 nanometers, approximately there. At about 400 nanometers, the blue cone might fire. It might activate. It has a particular threshold to set off a cone or a rod even, right? At, let's say, 500 nanometers, it's unlikely to fire. But if you have a light that happens to be, part of the light is 420 nanometers, it's really likely to go off. So this is what we consider wavelengths for violet, blue, cyan, green, yellow, and red. Look at our red and green cones, though. This is where it fires off at 534. This is 564. They're really close together. And so longer wavelength light is in the red range. Shorter wavelength light is in the blue, violet, ultraviolet range. And your rods, oh yeah, they're your rods. They're firing off at 498 nanometers approximately, but any light sort of in this range will set it off. It's sort of covering both of those sets of colors. So we have 120 million rods, only 5.5 to 6 million cones in our eyes, depending on the person, of course. That is a huge difference. For one that only sees black and white, we keep on thinking our color system is so good. Yeah, but all the stuff on the outside, most of those are rods. They're not cones. And we have this 2% of your cones are blue sensitive. 2%. That is ridiculously small. And yet, it's critically important. So this is why luminance brightness is so effective at coding information, because we have so many damn rods, especially on the outer periphery. We're really good at sensing light and dark as well. We don't think we are, but we are. And when we talk about cones, this is why, for most people at least, we're really red sensitive. We see red particularly well if you have what would be considered quote-unquote normal vision, right? If you do not have red-green color blindness or something like that, you have a lot of red cones. You're very good at detecting the color red. Why is that? Hopefully I'm not going to get ahead of myself here. Well, what do you need red for? I have a patch of strawberries out the back that tells me why I need red, or a mango, or pretty much anything that's fresh fruit, right? Apples, like a lot of your fruits, vegetables, and things you might be picking from a tree are going to be red. Red is a very, very important thing. If you're looking for caloric intake from a fruit, as one theory at least, red is a really important thing to be able to notice. Green is all over the place in our world. You need to be able to notice that. Blue, how often do you need blue if you're a monkey in a tree, right? If you were hunting and foraging society, you want to see red. That's what your berries are. That's what a lot of your food sources are. A lot of your animals might be even there, right? So we're sensitive to it based off of our sort of historical reasons. I would like you to take a little bit of a pause for a second. I want to put you to stick your hand out in front of you, make a fist, and stick it out in front of you. Sorry, the camera's going to look terrible, but stick it out in front of you. Okay. How much can you see? When you're looking at your fist, how much can you see? Now, move your fist slightly to the side, but still looking at where you were looking before. Not looking at your fist, looking straight ahead. Now, how much do you see? Do you see as much detail about your fist? Now move your fist like 60 degrees away from your face. How much do you see? Now move it to the side. You wouldn't think you'd be able to see it, but you can actually see it just slightly beyond a certain point. How much do you see? Turns out we have this crazy amount of detail in our fovea. So, and the size of a pixel, how much you can see at any given time, changes radically based on where you're looking. The edge of your visual field, you see the size of about your fist at arm's length. We can see 100 points on the head of a pin at arm's length at the center. Now, this is for, presumably undergrad university students, not me, but that's still pretty phenomenal. Half our visual processing power is just in our fovea. So you might have those neurons, but all of our visual processing is in that one little sweet spot area. This fovea, let's do it, I have near peripheral, I have paracentral, and I have central. That central point is this amazingly accurate area where we're going to see the minute details. And as soon as you move off of that, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And so we get this kind of like, depending on where this thing is hitting your visual processing system, different levels of precision. Our peripheral, we can get up to 110 degrees around the side of our head, which is weird because I don't know how it works. Right? It's very hard to get that light into there, but you can actually see even beyond like 90 degrees away from the side of your head. What's important though is that if I look at this image, let's say if I was this is a simulation of that image. If I'm looking at the 24.5, this is actually what my eye is getting in terms of visual processing. I get this really, really focused, clean sight at one little spot, and then out from that, it gets a bit blurry. Out from that, it gets a bit blurrier, all the way out. Which means that if I have something like a subway map and I'm looking at Kendall MIT, which is this thing right here, if you see my pen moving around here, or maybe I should use my mouse. Kendall MIT. If I'm looking right here, this is where MIT is located in Boston. What do I end up getting? Oh, I did highlight it. Is I get this. A mongrel is this quick visual perceptual view of things, and so you get this low-level pattern processing on the outskirts and really clear on the inside. if I'm glancing at something quickly, that's what I see. I don't see the rest. I see some rough stuff on the outside and something very, very precise on the inside. And so what you need to do sometimes is, if I have a subway map like this, I don't want this. It looks like garbage. I'm not seeing anything at that point in time. You redesign your subway map, like the green line here, so that you get straight lines, so that when it does get blurred, because you're looking at it at a glance, it doesn't blur as badly. Here's what it looks like with the original mongrel and the redesign using a different mongrel, right? The lines are a lot cleaner. You can sort of, even if you don't know you're seeing this, it makes a difference in how quickly you perceive something. And if you're talking about a subway map and you're running, this is actually an important thing. So, how do we actually see then? If all we see is this really, really, really high quality bit, but it's really small, how do we see? Well, we move our eyes. It's a small, quick fixation of our eyes in about 200 milliseconds. That's how we read. If you see someone read, just watch. Their eyes are bouncing around all over the place. So we see a whole bunch of little tiny images, and then our brain stitches it together. So if we were looking at, this is the longest set of PowerPoint transitions ever, by the way, just to let you know, because it's taking up all the size of the file. If I do an eye tracking system, so this is Michelle Workin, one of the people that designed the phase class at Northeastern. She's looking at there's an eye tracking camera right here. I should have there, infrared camera, looking at her eyes, so you don't see the infrared going into your eyes. We have a visualization display, the thing that she is looking at. She has a computer, and then she has an eye tracking control computer, and then an experimental computer. She puts her head in there, so her head's not moving around, and the eye tracker is noticing where she's looking. It knows where the screen is, knows where her eyes are, and therefore deduces where she's looking based off of where her eyes are pointing. All right, this is how it works. Oh, am I going to transition? No. So starts there. She doesn't know where the image is. Fires in the center of the page. Great. Reads the text. Down, reads the other text. Looks at the largest book first. Reads the title. Goes back, sees what other things she's seeing. Jumps down here. Checks the next book. The height of the next book. Checks the next title. Down, down, down. This is an actual set of data that she was doing, right? The height of that bar, though, she didn't have to move her eye for. She saw it automatically, because even if it's in her periphery, she can see that it's the highest bar. That's why she jumped there first. And then you jump next page, next one, next one, next one. This is actually how she is now. She's looking at the axes on the side, and then she's looking at the final book there. You are stitching together your world constantly. That's why I said reality is an illusion, in the fact that you stitch together your world constantly. You are constantly scanning your world and stitching it together. To the point, and I don't know if I have a slide on this, to the point that giant optic nerve in the back of your eye is a giant blind spot. You have no cones or rods where that optic nerve is. All the neurons are going through it. So you have a huge blind spot in the back of your eye, and you don't even know it. You can simulate it by drawing something on a piece of paper, looking at a different part of the paper, and eventually, if you're looking around, the little drawing, that it has to be like a little minuscule drawing, like a star or something like that. Look around just enough, and if it's about 2 feet away from you, and you're looking around on the piece of paper, at some point in time, the star's just going to disappear on you. You filled in the blanks. You fill in the space that is your your blind spot in the back of your eye. You fill it in with whatever is around it. You will fill in all sorts of information in your world. Your world is not something like, you don't have video cameras in your head and this perfect storage system. It's associative on top of that. I'll give you one other example. I actually have really weird optic nerves, it turns out, to the point that they worried I had early onset regular pressure glaucoma, which is just a doctor later was like, no, you don't have that. That's fine. But I was taking drugs for my eyes for like 5 years because I have weird looking optic nerve. I have weird looking blind spots in the back of my eye, and they didn't know what it was, and they were afraid it was glaucoma. And I don't know it's there until someone tested me. I did not know. I'm filling in like half my world that I don't even see it. I have a giant blind spots in my periphery. Okay, here's what's happening with our nerves. Remember we said these neurons are connected together? So we're going to just use some cones here rather than a rod, but it could be a rod as well. Here's what's going to happen. We have a bunch of surrounding cells, and we have a central cell. Notice the surround cell becomes the central cell when you put another neuron on the other side. So every cell is both a surround cell and a central cell, but it depends on how you look at things. But here is, I have some piece of light going right here, hitting this surface, let's say, and no light on the outside. What ends up happening is if I have a white stripe on a dark background, this neuron will be fired, this one will not, this one will not. So if only one neuron, not the surrounding neurons, but only the central neuron gets fired because it has a bright light that it's seeing, or a white stripe, something brighter, what will end up happening is that neuron will fire in a crazy way. It'll fire very, very strongly, because what you end up getting is these are promoting and inhibiting each other. This neuron fires, and these neurons are not fired, and it goes, holy crap, and sends up a big signal to the bipolar cell. If I have a dark spot and light on the other sides, what ends up happening is these are fired, this is fired, the surrounding cell cones fire, the central cone does not fire, and then suddenly it inhibits the bipolar cell. So I have no activation. And if everything's completely dark, the neurons spontaneously fire at a fairly, somewhat irregular interval. They just fire from time to time. Not constantly, just every once in a while they fire. Well, you get the spontaneous firing versus there is no spontaneous firing. It's completely inhibited if I have a dark background. And if I have slight activation, if everything's light, well, I have a bit more firing, but it's not much. What does this actually mean? It means this. This illustration always freaks me out. If you look at any one of these circles, it's a white circle, right? We're all agreeing that it's a white circle. But in your periphery, without moving your eyes, look at this circle here. In your periphery, look at the other circles. So keep your eyes here. What do the other circles look like? They look like they have a gray splotch in the center, don't they? Yet when you move your eye to it, there's no gray splotch in the center. But it sort of looks, that's why it's shifting in and out. Your visual system is shifting in and out with whether there's a gray splotch in the middle of it. Because what ends up happening is I have this same kind of thing where if I am here, I'll have this thing will be dark, this is light, so this thing will be fired more. It will fire off more, but not that much. These surrounding cells are also light. Okay. When I get to the center here, four parts of my surrounding cells say this is light. The center is not that different from the rest of it, so it looks kind of grayish because it doesn't have this. Surrounding cells are dark. This is light. The thing you were really trying to emphasize here is we see edges of things based off of this difference. We see differences or changes in light levels. We see changes in color. We don't actually see the color. We don't actually see the lightness. We see where the changes are. We're very good at finding edges of things because of this system. So if I'm fixating here, I get a lot of all these things around me. They're fairly light, and so I don't have a huge spike in the amount of how bright this thing is, despite the fact it's fairly bright. But right here, two of the sides are actually dark, and so I get a fairly strong response. So despite this being darker, it actually looks about as bright as the center point here. The big thing is because we're so good at seeing things like this, finding edges. So this is called a Hermann grid, by the way. Because we are good at finding edges of things, it means we should be designing our systems based on that knowledge. I don't need lines. As long as things are relatively close to each other, I don't need lines. I see this orange and yellow, and there's clearly a white line in between, and it will look like it has an outline without me having to put an outline in there. I don't need to waste pixels putting an outline on this thing. I will see an edge anyways because of this whole lightness darkness thing. If it happened to be very, very light yellow, very, very light green, let's say, and white, I don't get that edge. And so contrast between what I'm looking at in terms of lightness makes a huge difference. Less about the color difference and more about where my ability to see an edge based off of light differences. So if I'm putting, this is me putting a border around a whole bunch of things and me putting borders around all of this stuff and all this extra visual clutter when I don't need it. I will see that anyways. I will clump and cluster things based off of proximity. We'll look at Gestalt principle soon enough. I don't actually need that line. It's implied in there. It also means that fonts on the screen are going to be different. So a serif font is one with that's with this extra stuff on the bottoms and the sides, right? This extra little visual flourishes. Some people really love them. There's some research suggesting that on paper they're fantastic. Why? Because on paper you have ink hitting let's say rough paper, and it bleeds over into certain areas. And so because it can't be that crisp, what you end up getting is that little bleed over effect. The serifs, these little bits onto any given character, help us identify what the A is. Versus a sans serif is something like this. Arial, for example, Helvetica is also one. Those tend to be better for computers. So a serif font actually slows down your reading because there's extra stuff, there's extra edges for you to be seeing. You're perceiving extra edges. It might be actually harder to disambiguate the characters, but those extra little bits help you disambiguate when there's two, a C versus an O on paper because of bleed over effects. You don't have that problem as much on a high resolution screen, so you don't need serif fonts. Other use case of this, for example. So we already talked about lights going into our eyes, but this is doing a small part. This is just finding edges. We're good at finding edges. It's also telling us what colors there are in there. We don't perceive the colors, we're just, certain neurons are firing, and these neurons are going to the back of your head. And then we do a bunch of stuff with it. Well, first level is we find shape, we find patterns. We're finding approximate fuzzy shape based on rat studies that we do. Contours, that sort of thing. That's what that contour is doing. One level, we also, for low level stuff, we also identify colors. We also identify motion. These are things that happen in the very, very fundamentally first stages of visual processing. Later on, we'll identify, more fundamental shapes, like a line versus just a general shape. Like a line, this is a continuous line. And then from there, we might identify an object based off of the fact it's a bunch of lines put together. But because we have this low-level analysis, it means that whether you want to or not, there's certain things you can't ignore. Pop-out effects. Where is the red circle? No, unless you're red-green colorblind, in which case I apologize. Everyone here saw it before I even asked what the question was. It's a pop-out effect. You have no choice but to see it. There are certain visual effects you can do that will really catch attention or separate things. Where is the red circle now? Should be fairly simple, fairly fast to do. You don't even have to do a visual scan. It will actually pop out. It used to be called pre-attentive processing. You cannot stop yourself from seeing these sorts of things. Where's the red circle now? Much harder. I have to scan through all of these shapes looking for a red circle. Now I'm doing a linear search. One was like binary search, this one's like linear search, right? I have to scan through every single one of these things to try and find the red circle. I cannot do a conjunction very easily. Combining multiple pop-out effects means I get no pop-out effects. And it's a big, big deal. Motion, however, really effective. I did a bunch of studies on motion because of that. Motion is really pre-attentive, and whether you want to see it or not, you will see it, and you can't tune it out. You have to actively put cognitive resources into removing motion, essentially. We also have a bunch of other ones. So we have lines for orientation. We have length, for example. One of those is longer than the other ones. We have closure, it's pre-attentive. Size of different things, like width, for example, amount of curvature, density, how many numbers or orientation of thing, estimation of particular numbers, colors, common one. We have common motion, direction of motion, velocity of motion, lighting, direction, 3D depth cues, All of these things, they're all pre-attentive things, all of which you can use to grab somebody's attention and say, look at this. The intensity of a color. All of these you cannot stop someone from seeing this if you use it. But these are not always separable. So position and hue can be separated. Look for the red circles on the left side. Pre-attentive, right? You can spot those right away. Hue and size combined together, there's some interference. Looking for the large purple circle takes a bit more time. You have to sort of scan, but it's a fairly easy scan. Height and width, they combine together. So if I want to have the wide and high circle, I can look for it, but the wide circles and the high circles sort of conflate with one another. But if I have two colors, for example, at the same time, I don't separate them at all. If you want me to find the red and the green circle, I can't even do it, even if you tell me it. Unless you tell me that it has to be this color that I'm trying to match. There's this, because I have two different colors, I cannot combine two different dimensions of data. If I encode one thing with red, brightnesses of red, and another, I also encode the same item with brightnesses of green, I don't actually see two different things. I see red-green at the same time, not red and green as separate dimensions. Width and height, I can encode two different dimensions with that. I don't get a pop-out effect, but I'm encoding I am encoding by height, I'm encoding by width. I can encode two different dimensions with size and hue, right? I can separate those things out. And I get pop-out effects when I get them fully separable. I can get pop-out effects in one dimension or another. If I have some interference, I don't really get a lot of pop-out effects, but I can still differentiate them. And if there's major interference, don't do it, right? If I cannot encode two things with two different colors, I cannot encode hue, so colors of the rainbow, and saturation at the same time. Can't do it. Doesn't work. So color and location work, color and shape work, okay, size and orientation work. Depending on what you're looking at, there's different levels of how much you can separate these things. And so if I want a pop-out effect, there are some key design principles, right? I can get pop-out effects from all these things. But they're really good for drawing attention. They are not good at encoding all your data. Because what we end up getting with a pop-out effect is if everything is important, nothing is important. If you try and do pop-out effects for everything, which some people try, you won't get pop-out effects for anything. You have to keep it as your sort of secret weapon. If you want a perceptual pop-out effect, which are great, you want to call users' attention to something, you want to highlight something, you better make sure that you don't have other perceptual pop-out effects anywhere else, right? You want to keep it for an emergency or for something really important. It's also the reason why you can't bold all your text and underline all your text and do this and make everything flashing text, right? You can't make blinking HTML everywhere. People are no longer paying attention to anything anymore. This would be an example, right? This is quarterback sneak stats, and there's the New England Patriots really standing out in there. There's a pop-out effect. It's very effectively done. There's one color being used, and everything else is muted to make sure that you pay attention to that one color. Right? People actually will do this. Well, I have a picture of, I think, a kitchen design or something like that, right? Where they have one color that pops out. Why? Because everything else is black and white. Maureen Stone, though, just in case you want to go color on everything, one of her big things is get it right in black and white. She is like the world's foremost expert, or at least the world's foremost visualization expert involving color. And so things like maps, if you do a map, if you do any visualization in color, print it off in black and white, or check it out what it looks like in black and white. If you can still read it, great. If you can't, back to the drawing board. Because we have so many rods and so few cones, you better make sure that the black and white also holds up. So that's why the philosophy, get it right in black and white. We can do different things. So luminance, if you want to use a fancy word and you can all look all smart in front of your friends, it's the amount of lightness that you have. When we say get it right in black and white, we mean the luminance, how bright this thing is, because that's what our rods are picking up. And the amount of lightness is how much light is hitting your eye, or brightness. I guess lightness is the amount of perceived light intensity reflected of reflected light or reflectance versus brightness is so lightness is how light like say a piece of paper is. It's reflected light, but a lot of that light's reflecting into your eye, versus brightness is how intensity the original light source is. Always flip those around. So I can have for a computer screen, a lot of times it's brightness because you have an LED light in the back, pushing the lights out towards you. But if you're looking at a piece of paper, it's lightness. We also have what's called lightness consistency, or constancy. What's really weird about light is that we're so good at adapting to things, we don't know we're doing it. So here is a newspaper, and it says gloves off, and we have a little snippet of this piece of the newspaper, little circle of this piece of the newspaper, and I want you to notice that, I should have an animated transition there. This right here, this center of the O, is actually dark gray. This right here, where the black is actually this color here. They're the wrong, if you take them away from the newspaper, it's clear that this is a darker color, but you're perceiving that as white because there's a shadow and it's surrounded by even darker text around it. We find edges. Our world is not consistent. We find edges and we find differences. That's how we see things. Similarly, if I have a gradient in the back, for example, that bar in the center is constant color. If you put gradients in the back, or you change the background color as you go, you're going to see colors and you're going to see lightness differently depending on what you have in the background, and it'll change how you perceive your data. If you're looking for the dark black or the dark gray bar, and you have a black background, it's going to look different than if you're looking for the dark gray bar on a white background. Similarly here, those two things are actually the same color. And if you don't believe me, there you go. And notice as soon as I don't have that edge anymore, if I don't have that point of comparison, my brain automatically says, yeah, that's all the same color. But you don't get it until it clicks together. Isn't that wild? Anyways. Or here, A and B, and oh, yeah, they're the same color. For luminance, we're about to go into color in a second. But for luminance, for the brightness of light, we're going to see this later on when we talk about the two visual processing channels that we have. We don't see edges without lightness differences. We don't see shading without lightness differences. And therefore, it is extremely important for how we see things, how we see the shape of a bar chart, how we see where the number starts and where it ends, where the bar is, where the line ends. All of this contours and shape, how we read text, it's all based on luminance. It's nothing to do with color. And it has also higher spatial sensitivity than color channels. We see spatial information, we see shape with brightness, not with hue, not with color of the rainbow, but with brightness. It allows you for legibility, for attention, and for layering, and it is one of our primary design rules. You do not play around with just the hue and ignore the luminance. The luminance tells you how to differentiate things. Not only because some people are red green colorblind, but because luminance is so important for how we see things. It is something to really pay attention to. Okay. So in case you want, here's one particular illusion. Here is another particular illusion in case you're wondering if our brain works as you think it does. No, it does not. That tabletop and that tabletop are exactly the same size. I think that might be it. And in case you're, I'd like you to try this. We might try this in our in-class thing. I want you to find your favorite illusion. Groups of two, find your favorite illusion, visual phenomena online. And copy the image as best you can, put it into the drive folder, so either just the image or text with the image included into it. That's probably even better, like a Google Doc. And put in the Lecture 7 drive folder. And if you were red-green colorblind, I want to be more inclusive on this. There's a lot of people who will give it like red-green colorblind, things that are color illusions. And in case you have a visual issue like me, like I have these giant blind spots in my eyes, If you are, let's say, red green colorblind, find one that only works for people that are very green colorblind, or only works for some people. So this, for example, is you know how what the heck is it called? There are color blindness tests that you can do where you see like a number in certain colors on a different color background. And if you're red green colorblind, you don't see a number. Well, this illusion right here, supposedly, I don't know, this illusion right here is only visible to people that are red green colorblind, or a certain kind of red green colorblind. So if you see something here, I don't see anything. If you do, great, you see an illusion that no one else sees. So you can look for things that only you can see, but the rest of the class can't, and explain that as well. What you're looking for is some kind of illusion, and see if you can explain it in terms of what we just talked about. Maybe not every illusion you can explain through that, but find your favorite illusion out of the bunch. Okay? I think with that, I'm going to take my leave, and then when we come back next time, we're going to look at color.